Hey, this is Paul Holtzclaw, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
Man, I get to do the coolest shit. I love that. Look, there's a lot of shows out there about espionage and spies and all that kind of thing, but I don't know anybody else that gets more real people that would never come on a show otherwise. I don't know how much TV and other media you've done, Paul, but I got to believe I'm pretty far ahead of the field in terms of talking to real counterintelligence people that have really done the job.
Yeah, I think so. I've only caught a couple of full episodes. I try to watch when I can, but I try to stay busy around the house, being an old man now. So, I don't have a lot of time, but everything I've watched, I like it because of its purity. I like people being honest about the field, and there's, as you know, historically with this career field, this profession, there's a lot of misconceptions and there's a lot of ideas out there that are just I don't know, they're maybe ill-conceived about how we're best used, and just as one example. But anyway, yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. This is a great forum to really get down to brass tacks with it. So I
Let's
appreciate
cover
the
some.
again.
Yeah.
Thank-
Well, of course. I don't want to interrupt you too much.
No, go,
um,
man.
let's cover some current events. So I'm going to ask you a
Sure,
couple of questions and feel free to expound on them. Is
sure.
it at all legal to have TSSCI on your server in your house, TS documents or secret documents at your home in Florida? Can you have secret information unsecured in your office? Or any of these things that the very tippity top of our nation in terms of leadership
Yeah.
go, are any, and I have not used a Democrat or a Republican example.
No, I
I've
got
used
you. No, absolutely.
is is any of that in any way legal at all?
No, you know as well as I know, it's not. I mean, uh, there are provisions for handling secret material in a public residence that can be allowed, with the proper accreditations. But TS and above, unless you're really walking a strange and weird tightrope, it shouldn't be happening.
And if you are on a strange and weird tightrope, there's annotation of that this is a strange and weird tightrope. Here is all
Right,
the paperwork. Because
right,
the people who are subordinate to that person are like, whoa, hold on. I don't want to go to jail. And what we're doing is illegal.
right,
Unless, look, if the boss says, hey, Secretary of State Clinton, you can absolutely have TSSC on your home server, then okay, well, we got a different problem. But that
right.
paperwork doesn't exist, right?
Yeah, as long as the provisions are there, and as long as, I mean, certainly there are agencies and there are entities that do things, in on the dark side uh, of operations where people they're not privy to it, well, unless they have that special access.
Mm-hmm.
Of course that is possible. It's not outside the realm of possibility, but I don't think where we've seen it in the public eye in the last year, in either case, is something that I would just from the outside looking in think, oh, that was kosher, you know. But
Yeah. 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 And then, so when people have these extravagant, outsized opinions, and they are not badged or credentialed, former badged or credentialed federal agents who deal in counterintelligence, it's like, okay, look, you get a pass, but you're just revealing your partisan nature. Like, it is always wrong to have these things. And you and I both know if you don't secure classified, then it is known to anyone. That's where we start. And then there's also legal requirements there. And as people don't understand this, so if you do find TSSCI on someone's home server, okay, deal with the legalities of that and the prison time and the fines. But now, guys like us, we have to go out and investigate the damage done. And I don't believe that's happened in any of these cases.
right, at least not that it's been transparent. Yeah,
Right. And
when I
that
was
would,
doing
yeah.
I was just going to say, when I was out in DC working, one of the things that struck me most was that representatives in Congress are not required to have security clearances as a matter of protocol. There are
Mm.
those that are on like the Senate Intelligence Committee and special committees that are vetted, but there's a lot of things with that oh, with those processes, I think that are even questionable as whether or not people are truly vetted. And I mean,
Right.
I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but
Yeah.
suffice to say, I've done interviews out there with representatives and senior execs in government that should not have had clearances but did.
Yeah. And if you get elected, by the nature of your position, you probably need access to classified, even if you are a wife-beating alcoholic gambler. Like pick like all the
Right.
things that you wouldn't want to pick. That person
Right.
needs access to things, right? And so there is a forcing maneuver because of the fact that the people's will is spoken, and that person needs access.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here's the next part of this thing. When if I would say, hey, Paul, I want you to work on infiltrating a nation's parliament or congressional body, and we have some targeted people who we'd like you to go after. If you were able to place within their organization someone who works on their staff or someone who sleeps in their bed, and this is me, right? I'm guiding you as my agent of the United States to go out and collect these things. I mean, how sweet would that job be? Like, how much money would be thrown at you to exploit these weaknesses, and how far would we go to expand that exploitation and just sponge up every bit of knowledge we could?
Not only that, absolutely, but not only that, when you do enter those types of operations, the scruples are left at the door. They're checked at the door.
That's
so
right.
Everything is on the table.
Everything.
Yeah.
So swinging the camera around and going the other direction. If you and I are in DC and we realize that Eric Swalwell and Senator Feinstein have been exposed and continue to be exposed to agents of other countries, what in Congress are we not investigating?
Right. Yeah. I mean, there are things that just reek of impropriety and ineptitude as far as managing and protecting critical U.S. information, whether it be sensitive, unclassified, or classified information. Certainly, if you're a bedfellow with a foreign national, right, there ought to be some checks and balances to at least sever some relationships that you have with internal information.
Yeah.
At
least. And what you're saying there is, we'll use Eric Swalwell in this case. Hey, you're sleeping with someone we believe to be a Chinese spy. So we're going to remove you from these sensitive information areas. You still do what you want to do. And this would be very permissive, by the way, for a government to allow all this. But and again, guys like us, we're like, okay, well, we have these 2 breaches. And again, let's remove politics from this, because you and I both know if there are 2 breaches, there are 100 until we can figure out that there are not. So it's just not about Democrat or Republican. This is about breaches and who is breaching. What are they finding out? Who else is breaching? Who else is breached?
Yeah. When I did, while I was out there, one of the things I did out in DC, don't know if you've ever heard of these, but they're called Presidential Rank Awards. You ever heard of those?
No.
Okay. So once a year, every year, I guess annually, the President of the United States can award up to 6 times base salary to a senior executive, SES 15 and above, which there are quite a few of. Every year, the president gets to award as a rank award. It's basically a bonus, an annual bonus. And there are people who have gotten it multiple times and so on. So while I'm out there doing PSI, for lack of a more modern term, we had to vet these candidates. So you got to do 8 developed and 8 listed sources, and it was an exercise it was a complete rote exercise, because going out and spending U.S. government money to vet these people was nothing more than sitting down with a source or potential source for 30 minutes, sometimes only 5 because they didn't want to grant you the time, sometimes an hour because they were chattery. But it was really almost an exercise in futility. And because there was not a single time I ever encountered an individual who had anything at all negative to say. So, I mean, I get it. I understand
Yeah.
these are people that are trustworthy and they're professionals in their fields, but it was just almost kind of a joke and laughable because you just had these people at high levels getting a lot of money, and wasn't really, didn't feel like to me anybody was really being vetted,
Right.
But
But so I think we've made our point about what we know about counterintelligence and some of the things that have happened, like factually happened in the recent past. Let's look at other parts of this machine. So if you are hired to be the senior security officer for, say, the House of Representatives, how do Pete and Paul here on this show, how do we take that person seriously? Or
yeah,
if you're the SSO for the FBI, I mean, how do we take people seriously if they don't have the influence to do the job we both know they damn well know they have to do?
right. I think it is the one systemic problem within human intelligence, and that is the people that have the power to make the executive decisions that decide how the money's spent, where the emphasis and where the authority is given to affect real change and real policy administration.
Mm.
If it's the same inherent problem, I think, that we've experienced years on now, 20 plus 30 years maybe, and it is simply that the powers that are in charge, they don't understand human intelligence. They don't. You can tell them. You can tell them the risk factors. You can tell them about elicitation and people trying to get at them through their placement and access. You can educate them, and
Yes.
it's almost like it falls on deaf ears. And it's almost like, they don't want to spend the money on it. They just kind of believe that it's going to take care of itself, and it
Yeah.
does take care of itself for the adversary. Unfortunately, in countries that are significant as far as our threats to the United States, North Korea, China, Iran, Russia, these big powers that have, if they don't have the capability individually, they have the capability to harm us if they were to join forces.
Mm.
But those nations take it very seriously. They take the threat very seriously, us as being the threat to them, and they take it very seriously, trying to gain our information. And so, man, it's a crazy world.
It's a crazy world.
It is a crazy world, man. I mean, I used to be big on privacy. As a counterintelligence agent, it was drilled into my head, discretion and privacy.
Right.
Dude, I haven't totally given up the ship, but
Right.
part of me feels like, man, what is the point? I mean, we've given so much away, and I think we've harmed our country, regardless of what, it's not a political issue. Maybe it is at the root cause, but it's definitely just people that don't see a value in protecting American interest or America's sovereignty or our strength. And it's painful, but it is what it is.
I forget what the number is, but it is shockingly high. This nation opens a counterintelligence investigation against the Chinese asset every, I think it's 90 minutes.
I believe it.
And that is, so we have this hope and desire to be a better country where we use our energy in a way that's less harmful to the earth. Okay, great. We all think like, let's all be better. To build that infrastructure, because we don't have it, like our existing infrastructure is stretched to its limit first in terms of electricity. We have to bring in machines that we don't make. Where do we make those machines? Well, we make them overseas, largely in China. And so when equipment comes, it's got to be inspected and look for countermeasures. And the counter people have to try to counter the counter over there. And so we're doing all this work, and it's not sustainable to offshore these things. But even then you and I would have to go put our Department of Energy contractor hats on and be like, let's go look at the people working inside the organization, because are they compromised? And oh my God, like, it gets crazy.
Right.
And so these problems never end.
You know, when I first left the Army in 2001, I went to work for NASA down at Johnson Space Center, and they had never had. If you maybe don't even believe this statement, but NASA never had a counterintelligence program prior to 2001.
Is that
So,
right?
absolutely true.
It's insane.
Not even no sort of technology protection intervention, anything, nothing. Now, what they did have, I stand corrected. What they did have, and what most all scientific and R&D industry has, is the ITAR, International Trafficking in Arms Regulations. So they did have that. They do have that. But the problem with the ITAR is that it is a passive system. It requires the author of the white paper or the developer of the technology to come to the ITAR office and say, hey, I'm developing this super duper widget. Yeah. Does it have any defense application that I should be concerned about before I share it with this guy over here in country X? Yes. And if without that transaction can occur unfettered, unimpeded. And so, it was quite frustrating to be in that environment. I got lectures about how science was, the crux of science was to share information. And that was why in the 18th century, we stopped crushing baby skulls because they used curved forceps, because some scientist in England shared his forceps idea with America. And I mean, it just was bizarro. I'm sitting there listening to these people tell me these anecdotes about why they need to share information. And I'm just trying to get a simple point across that, hey, what you're doing might have a defense application, and it might be worth protecting to some degree. It was horrible at times, but is what it is. It's an academic environment. That's what I learned too. Is NASA is almost purely academic, and that's part of the inherent issue.
It's crazy the things that we do classify, and it's crazy the things that we don't classify. There's all kinds of knowledge that we do pre-classification at the university level, where you have people who are specifically tasked, like, hey, you're going to go be a student at Stanford, Chinese dude or Chinese chick. Go there and insert yourself into something, and you will report back. And look, they have the biggest intel organization in the world because of this.
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't make China bad, by the way. It just, this is their approach. Yeah.
Yeah. And everyone in a position of placement with access is a potential source for them. Everyone.
Right.
And it's that's there's no limit. That's how they view it. That's their methodology, and it's been successful for them.
And so an unfettered access, it's like, well, I mean, what are we going to do, right? In some ways, like, you can't fight that. It's too big and it's too present. So just innovate faster than they do. I don't know what you do to combat that. But what does the counterintelligence part of you say to that? Like, we can't stop everybody, and we don't want to. We want to include people, and as many people that turn and send information back, we're probably 5xing people that are like, fuck, I love Hooters, man. And I love this pretty chick over here, and I'm going to inculcate into American society. I mean, that's the norm.
Yeah. When I was in the throes of it at NASA, and I was trying to be part of standing up a counterintelligence organization whenever there had been one, or even thoughts along those lines. The thing that I came to realize, and I think it holds true, and I think it is the issue that has to be, or the hurdle that has to be overcome. I think that because the State Department has so much influence over who comes and who goes, they have the privilege of telling the FBI whether or not an intelligence officer can come into the United States or not. They can, even though the FBI has the purview of investigating national security crimes on U.S. soil, the State Department has the legal wherewithal to tell the FBI, no, we're going to let this person in. So what if you have to watch them 24/7? We
Yeah.
want them in. Those are the kinds of things that they become political by their very nature, because you have heads of state and heads of department agencies that are making decisions. Doing interviews with people at Department of State. It's a different mindset altogether. They're in an ambassadorship, nation building mindset, and that is what their focus is. So
it's I love that we're having this conversation and at this level. We're going to get into like your stuff probably in the second half of the
I'm
show.
probably going to get somebody showing up on my doorstep.
I hope so. I hope so. One of the things too, right, when we have this access to these people is if Paul and Pete are on our job, we're advising the State Department, we're like, wait, how many agents and where are they? Oh, this is great for us. Yeah, we're just going to go stick a guy on those guys and we're going to try to flip them, right? And look, double agents, triple agents, these things happen, but they happen because you allow something dangerous in. And when I was working on camps in Iraq and advising on like who to bring on, I'm like, bring them all on. You got a soldier standing there with a gun and they've got a rake. Bring them on. Let's get them on our side to one, get them some money so they weren't the enemy. But two, if they are bad and if they are scoping around, that's great. I'm going to get a guy on that guy and we're going to find out what they know. Because if they're working against us, shit, I need access to those people.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd rather have access to them on our camp than have to go find them out in the wild.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So when you look at what part of counterintelligence do you think you were best at? Is it stuff on the dark side? Is it, doubling and tripling agents? It's countering counter surveillance. What do you think is your sweet spot?
Well, you've heard the term stractical.
Yeah.
I'm sure. And unfortunately, I think unfortunately for myself, I never got to be on the pure strategic side of things. We ran sources and we did CIFSO, but I never been to the CIFSO course, never was given that career path. And it was just, maybe it was timing, or maybe it was just, the nature of the beast, or maybe it was just world events that kind of drove it. But, to answer the question, I think where I was in Bosnia when I was there, the main place we worked was Srebrenica. You had a fellow on that was my team lead before, and he ended up identifying a potential source, and he left the team. I took over the team as a team leader, even though I was an NCO, and asked for a particular specialist to be my team sergeant. And anyway, I don't want to divulge the names, only because it involved some special ops guys, and it involved eventually capturing a PIFWIC. It took 2 years from the time that we started developing that source to the time that the operation culminated in the apprehension, was a 2-year period. I didn't learn about it even until I attended a friend's wedding, and at that wedding he came up to me and said, "Hey, you're not going to believe this, but this work that we began and we culminated or cultivated, we got the guy, and this is how we got him." And I was just blown away by that. It was pretty cool. So, and the agent that was the team lead, along with another agent, and I will say his name because he's nowhere near CI anymore, and I don't know what he's done.
Yeah.
Super spooky. But Brian Zach.
Uh-huh.
And Brian, I'm sorry if I'm diming you out, man, if you're watching or if you see this. But I was so in tune to what was going on operationally when we were in country the first time. And Brian was a team member. He was a team lead out in the southeast or northeast. Not sure where he was at exactly. But anyway, he the ops control they were constantly hacked off at Brian Zach, and they were calling him a rogue agent and this and that and this and that because he was doing his own thing. And what I learned something from that. I learned that there was strength in that because he was fruitful. He was bringing home the bacon, and the team lead that I had before he left and I took over, he was of the same mindset. And even though I was always kind of like super strack soldier and all that, when it came to doing the job in country, I really did consider there to be almost no limits. As long as we operated within the law, as long as we maintained the rules of engagement the way we're supposed to, and security the way we're supposed to, and for the most part. But, as far as developing sources, hey, it was going for the jugular. And and I think that was a strength. I was meeting with the head of the Serbian Radical Party once in Srebrenica, and I'm sitting there during the meet. I'm tearing up, and I'm talking about how we share a lot of commonalities because I'm a Texan. Remember the Alamo, and I understand the mindset that those people possess, and afterwards we get on the road headed back to the base camp, and my interpreter's in the back seat just breaking down bawling, and I'm like, "What's the matter, dude?" And he's like, "How do you do that? How can you be that way?" And I said, "Man," I said, "it's a job. That's all." I said, "It's a job." And so I think my strength was, even though I never went strategic, to have that kind of stractical capability and opportunity present itself. I was fortunate to be able to take advantage of it. I had a great commander who was with the 501st out of Kitzingen, I think, or Bad Kreuznach, and they were just great because he was like, "Go do the job, man, whatever it takes." That's how he was, and I was like, "Wow," and it worked out. It worked out great.
I can't like this. It is so hard for people to understand that. Okay, first off, let's talk about Brian Zach for a second, and I'll have Brian on the show and we'll talk to him directly about this. But he gives off a vibe of arrogance and roguishness. Like his face, you look at him, you're like, that guy doesn't give a fuck. He's got a haircut like Iceman back then, and you look at him and you're like, yeah, not that he's hard to trust, but if you're a commander, you got your eye on that guy. And especially you hear him talk and you think, and this is not negative. It's just sometimes you can't help how you present. I present as a guy who's like a goofball who's not paying attention. But my brain is clocking everything you say. I once got fired from a job working at like a chlorine plant in Las Vegas. And they're like, you didn't pay attention to my entire briefing on the history of the company. And I'm like, you said this. And then, so I relayed it all back to her and she's like, well, that's the problem. You're too smart for here. And I was like, that's different. Don't say I didn't pay attention. I did pay attention. So a trick I had to develop, Paul, was I have to act like I'm taking notes. I don't take notes. Sometimes I take notes if there's something important, but for the most part, I'm writing like I'm inventing. I'll write down every president's name, every vice president's name. I'll write down every state cap. I'll also make a list of things. So it looks like I'm diligently writing, because if I just pay attention, it doesn't work. People think that I'm not paying attention. And it's nothing. So Brian has this thing, right? But Brian is right. This is the major leagues. You're on the field. And if you don't hit as hard as you can, you will get hit. It's just like on football. So we have to play hard. And there has to be an amorality to this because we are doing things that we wouldn't normally do, but we're playing for keeps. This is a lethal environment. And you and I know this. When we leave camp, we're not going to get into a firefight because we won't survive it. We're not geared up for a firefight. Sure, some of us can shoot, but I would rather, and I'm glad to say, like, I never had to shoot at a meeting, but I've been shot at a meeting, and so you're asking me to go in and be some kind of thing that you wouldn't be yourself if you were in the field. And people don't understand the complexities of, I've kissed an Iraqi guy on the cheek to let everybody in that town know that he was with me, knowing that he'd probably get killed later that day. And I did it on purpose because this guy was a threat to us.
Yeah.
So when we try to look at how agents are supposed to act and how they're supposed to collect, there is some risk, and some of us are going to mess up. We're going to drink too much. We're going to make some bad decisions. A team that is rogue can be highly effective. A team that is rogue might need to get swept up,
Yeah.
but we have to be left alone to figure out shit that's really hard to figure out. We're looking for needles in a haystack, and we don't even know where the haystacks are.
Right. Yeah, and it's it's a tightrope for a commander. It's a tightrope for an ops control to manage teams and leave them alone to do their jobs.
Mm.
I guess it's just trial and error, especially in a tactical environment.
Yeah.
Where things are dynamic and ever changing. So
we were in Delta Company 165th. This is a very unique unit, and the reason why I say that is it's a company, and ultimately they ended up being a battalion of just counterintelligence assets. Right? We had interrogators with us, but they didn't have a specific job when we deployed. So when you are walking around trying to determine where to place your trust, because you're a platoon sergeant, you got experience, you know the job. You got me, you got this guy, you got that guy. How do you determine who's trustworthy? Like it's hard. We don't get to see each other do the job hardly ever. Right. And so you're just trying to assess what are you looking for?
You mean talking about my team?
Yeah. Like if you're in a platoon, how do you know who's good at the job?
I don't know. I think, like when I asked for this particular specialist to come onto the team as the team sergeant, I think it was really because we just got along well. Mm-hmm. And, he was likable. And I'm like, that's the guy. If he's available, that's what I'd like to have. And, they sent him over. And I think the reason that worked out so well is because somehow we had a synergy. When we'd go in meetings, the only thing we ever agreed upon going into a meeting was which one of us was driving home and not drinking to excess. That was it. That's the only thing we agreed upon.
Right.
That's the only thing we agreed upon. Everything else was synergistic in the throes of things. I think that helped because it really came off as natural. Nothing was pretentious,
Yeah. How does an agent know when they're good at the job? Like you said, you don't get to pick your path necessarily. I mean, every field collector who's going to work tactically should have gone through CIFSO. I was lucky enough to teach there, thanks to Nancy Richards. And by the way, I got to say this out loud. The Army doesn't do this by design. It was an accident. I wasn't supposed to end up at Fort Huachuca. And Nancy Richards would never been able to grab me and say, hey, you just ran sources live in the modern environment. Let's get you at this course and you can work under me. That's not supposed to happen. We don't get to do that. And oftentimes we're so busy doing the job, we don't get to go to a CIFSO course. So how do you know when you're like, I know if you put me in the field, Paul, I'll kick anyone's ass on the entire country. There's no one that's going to outperform me because I know the job that well because I got to do it at the ground level forever. Yeah. So how do you know when you have that?
You mean for oneself?
For self, for
self. I think that comes with. I mean, you got to see the fruits of your labor. You got to be able to. Once you get close to a source, and you start to see the relationship kind of develop, which of course you're like you said, you don't know where the haystack is. You're out there just trying to find it. So once you think you've found it and you start to kind of whittle down and you think you found that needle, or you're getting close to the needle, I think with reporting and with feedback, I think that's kind of involved in it, to be lauded by your ops or whoever's reading your reports to say, hey, you're doing a great job or whatever, or that's good stuff. But short of that, when you look at just oneself, I think one just has to look at themselves and say, I know what I'm doing. I know what my game plan is. Right. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to do it. And there's going to be times I fall on my face, but at the end of the day, I'm going to put my best foot forward and got to get the info, and just focus on. You also gotta come across as genuine.
Yeah, boy. Yeah. Which means you have to just be genuine, right?
You do. You do.
I would say
To the point that others question whether or not you're
yeah.
actually, have you lost your mind? Are you really acting that way to someone who's a potential threat?
Yeah. 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 And it's so you and I are talking at a level right now. There's so much context that we can flesh out from this. So I'll just try to capture some of this in my world. And again, I've got a multi-degree black belt in counterintelligence and field collection. I would create access for Afghan or Iraqi elders on the camp, unfettered. You were going to walk on, not be searched. You're going to be saluted as and respected as the elder that you are. That is not what counterintelligence people normally do. And when I tell that to my peers, our peers, they don't like that. But you have to understand, this is my dojo, and I know this style really well.
And as you said that, since I've never been in that particular circumstance, I was like, ooh, a little bit of apprehension in my thought processes.
Yeah. I'm gonna do it again. You ready? Because you have to be good enough at the job to know when doctrine breaks down, and doctrine is a guide, and have the confidence. You don't just break doctrine willy-nilly. You need to be rooted in it. You need to know all the. I mean, I'm doing the stack of regs and pamphlets and FMs. You can't even see. My hands are like, it's like a huge stack, like 3 feet tall of shit you got to know. The best source that I could run in Afghanistan or Iraq was me. I had to create my own placement and access. And as you know, that's not what you're supposed to do. But it was so unreliable, the sources you'd find and your continued access to them. This wasn't like, you're so tactical. You're so day-to-day moving around. I had to be the person who could gather the information. Now, if I had the ability to go grab somebody and run some kind of a source, I would. But the primary collector, the primary access person was me.
Yeah. It's I've not been in that circumstance, so I can't even imagine. If someone threw me into that environment, it would be a sink or swim type situation. I think I would make it. It would be unorthodox, and I would figure out a way. But I think that's kind of where the Army training kicks in. Where self-confidence kicks in. Just having, not being afraid to make a mistake, looking at the bigger picture, that the bigger picture is somebody needs this information and they need the information to be good information. And take it seriously. I think if people take it seriously, it can be fruitful.
Part of that courage knows that Pete, the agent on the ground, I know that Paul has got a gigantic ass that he'll let someone chew on it for me and protect me. Because if I don't have someone, I would tell the commander, I'm like, I can be an awesome asset for you, but someone's going to come try to kill me. And I got killed more in the staff room. I got kicked off at camps. But as long as that commander said, Pete's my guy, he's staying and nothing's going to change that. I didn't mind making mistakes. And when I make mistakes, look, there's all kinds of mistakes. But if you don't have that top cover, you're protecting yourself. And it was always the case, Paul. Always the case that I was always in danger more on camp than off. Always.
Yeah. I mean, you alluded to it at the beginning of this conversation. These organizations, these entities out there that have the responsibility to protect information, one of the reasons that it doesn't get protected is because the people that are in the positions with their boots on the ground that are ultimately, they're the first level protectors. They're afraid to act in an aggressive manner to rein in a problem for fear that they're going to become one of those cut out of their career, or they're going to be in trouble for pointing out problems.
Yeah,
strange.
And there's not a. It's very strange. Yeah. The one of the things that people often don't understand. So like they'll give us booze and money and trinkets to apply favor with people. And there's absolutely a place for that, but it terrifies the regular army. And so you'll have some captain or something, and not to pick on captains, but you'll have a captain who's like, no, I want this kind of receipt. I'm like, motherfucker, I know this regulation, and it's actually my job. It's actually not your job. You happen to be the guy who holds the bag, but your job is ops. So go fucking do ops and give me my goddamn money, because this is all we're required to do, right? And if you think that this might be illegal, well, let me tell you what I'm doing off this camp. It's like, it's way worse the actual shit that we have to do, the calls that we have to make that are deep in the gray zone that could instantly turn black or white outside of our control, outside of the context.
Yeah. You know, it's one of those things you're making decisions on the fly, and it is what it is, you know?
Yeah. So when Pete makes what's perceived to be a mistake, and you are the guy who's going to protect me, what's your mindset? Let's just call it, hey, Pete blundered on this one, and I'm going to have to educate him, like, this doesn't work. Don't do this anymore.
Yeah.
And then also I've got to go and I got to stand up for my guy because I need him courageous in the field. What does that look like?
Yeah, it almost looks just matter of fact like that. You deal with it as a leader of a team. My thought process is, if I've got an issue, I'm going to go to that person. I'm going to let them know, you know, what I thought was effed up, and what I think the proper behavior should have been. And then if it's something, I mean, I thank God I didn't have any major faux pas. There weren't any major issues on my team that I can recall anyway. You know, sometimes those things kind of do blend in with the noise after the fact, and you don't really remember it, especially if you're successful. You know, you just think kind of, it's like memory works. You think about the good, and that's kind of what comes back. But you know, on the side going up the chain, you know, bad information doesn't get better with time. And if it's something that you know that somebody's going to find out against or find out about at a higher echelon, it's best just to go in and, you know, lay it all out there and give them your corrective action plan, and going forward how you're going to, you know, try not to make the same mistake again, and you know, make up for it. That's about all I can say, man. Is you know.
And it's tough because you're at headquarters, we're off in the mud somewhere, and so you have to give us a lot of benefit of the doubt, you know, because there's two and a half bosses between me and you at the platoon level, and so you got to go like, look, I know that whatever, you know, Bob runs a good team, and I have to let him do his job, so I've got to deconflict from above and say, hey, first sergeant, hey, commander, there's a bit of a problem here. We have it under control at the platoon level. Just want to let you guys know so you're not blindsided. We're going to go back to work. And then you're going to talk to Bob and figure it all out. But Paul, you're a good leader. And in the counterintelligence world, we're not stocked with those. Yeah, of course, but it's honest. And we're not stocked with those. We got a bunch of people that look out for themselves first, and would never stand up to a first sergeant and say, you're wrong. My job, back the fuck off. I'm going to go do this myself and get it done. And then when you have a problem with me, then let me know.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen too often.
You know, my first rotation into Bosnia, when we were down there the first time, we had 4 teams. I was the beans and bullets guy. You know, I was the guy bringing out printer ink to the teams, and replacement cables and things like that. And I knew it was an important job, but just as important, if not more important, whenever my teams were getting flack, you know, it was just a matter of telling command, hey, if the team leader or the team sergeant is telling me that they need to do X, Y, or Z, they are the guys that see the scope of their operation, and they know the hazards, and they know the hindrances, and they know the benefits. They know the operational area. You got to let them exist and let them operate. And if it goes sour, bend my dog tags, you know, in a tactical environment. You know, going back to what I was saying about Brian's act, when there were rumors kicked around about how he was on a team, and you know, the operational control element was upset and this and that, or there were conversations scuttlebutt about him being rogue, and I mean, just things, whatever it was that was out there, you know, those things get passed around. You hear it, And in those moments back in that first rotation, my thoughts were kind of, unverified. I had opinions. I knew who Brian was, didn't have
Yeah.
any adverse feeling toward him, but I heard people saying that. So I was like, whatever, I don't know. I'm not there. I can't say, you know. But when I became the team lead after my team leader left, and it was on my shoulders to produce and to, run an operation. Uh, hey, Eric, good to see you, sir. Um, yeah, but when it was on my shoulders and I had to make the decisions operationally, I reflected on that and I thought, man, he was out there doing the job, man. That's
Yeah.
what he was doing, and I was just, I was glad for that recollection and glad it worked out the way it did. I mean, our team was very successful. Very successful. I'm glad. And it was my
Yeah.
teammate, and it was the guy that went before me. It was the guy that, you know, identified this potential source, and it worked out. And I was grateful. It was definitely a career highlight.
Boy, I tell you what, and we suck at recognizing that, to the point where you didn't even know it happened,
Right.
and these are things that are major, major, major deals. Mike Modelwell had a great thing happen, a similar thing where they did this really unique thing in country. You guys should check that episode out. I'll put a link up in the show note here in a second.
That'd be cool.
But there's a lot of people that do incredible things. We don't have we have a badge, but no one cares about it. It's the least respected badge in all of federal agency. And we don't have like a pin or a lapel or a hat. And if you're a badass, no one knows. Even within your own unit, no one knows that you're a badass. You have to go do something else, go somewhere else to be recognized. And we lose a lot of really good people. CI collects a lot of really brilliant people. And I worked in a counterintelligence collecting capacity for the Army in 3 different ways: regular Army, Reserve Army, and Department of the Army. Never once did they do anything to try to keep me, and I barely got recognized. I got my end of tour, my PCS award from Bosnia, in the ops building in the dark with another E4, and he called us both to attention to mock everything and read my award out loud in the spirit of the Army, what the Army wants. But that's not how you do these things, right? And you're supposed to develop young people, and we suck at this. We suck as an organization.
I think every one of us, officers and enlisted alike, I honestly think that at some point in our careers, military careers specifically, have a similar story. Underappreciated. All the accolades come from within, and you got to have self motivation and self drive to even do the job because no one else is saying good job. And I think sometimes even when leadership does say good job and pat you on the back, sometimes it's just, a degree of misery in the operational element that doesn't make it as significant as it is. And then when you look at accolades like awards or recognition publicly for those things
Right.
that are able to be done publicly, they're few and far between, and often they're never as prominent as we would like them to be, as far as the prestige of them. But I think that it's just one of those things where you can only hope to get good leadership, and that has the ability and the authority to do things in a favorable way and show recognition and appreciation. Often it falls flat. When I went to work for NASA, I was the course manager at the agent course at Huachuca, and there was another E7 at the time. He said, "Hey man, there's this job offer out here." He knew I was being medically retired, and he said, "There's this job offer out here at NASA. Did you see it?" I'm like, "No, I hadn't seen that yet." He goes, "Well, take a look at it. It's for a CI agent." I looked at it and I'm like, "Yeah, right, NASA, me." Right. And he goes, A couple of days later, he comes back. That was like on a Wednesday, and it might have been the next day or a Friday. He came back and he said, "Hey, did you apply for that job?" And I'm like, "No, not yet." He said, "It closes tonight at midnight." And I'm like, "Oh, wow." So I went home and I jammed out a resume and I kicked it off, and I wound up getting the job. Well, I'll make the story short.
Yeah.
I was basically hired under a false pretense.
Hmm.
I was the guy that hired me, who was in charge of that center and responsible for hiring the CI lead, had a plan to use me in a different capacity. But he didn't clear that or convey that to the people that would eventually be in charge of CI for all of NASA. And he was just kind of working autonomously for his own benefit. Well, when I got there and I started trying to push the noodle up the hill, you know, it was, I just told him, I said, that's not how this works.
Yeah.
You got to have a need to know and security clearance. You have
Right.
neither. So I can tell you that I'm working on something operationally, but I can't tell you what it is. I can tell the people in DC who are, the operations element, but I can't tell you, my boss.
Right.
And man, it made for a nightmarish scenario. And I was there 8 years, and the last 4 were just, it was a nightmare. And I learned a lot out of it. I grew a lot out of it, but I almost smoked my gun a couple of times, and
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it was just, the only thing I got out of that was I had an operational control guy that said, "Paul, nothing will change unless somebody falls on their sword." And he was on his way out. He had resigned already. He was going back to MICEP, right? And I said, "Okay." So I took his words as a vote of confidence, and I literally did. I fell on my sword and paid for it quite dearly. But at the end of the day, when all things were left, by the time I even left that institution, that agency, the CI had already been reorganized, and it was umbrellaed up under one operational control element at headquarters, with no one at any center having any influence over CI ops at the respective centers. So it was like, it took my sacrifice in that way for that to happen. And it was painful, but
I bet,
those dudes that are out there now and gals that are out there now doing the job there, I know they're doing a good job.
Right. Yeah. And it's, again, this is a lot of context that's required to understand these things, but what you're talking about is all too common in our field, where you've done something incredible. You've done these two incredible things you've just told us about during your career, and only you can recognize them because no one else is going to care. There's no badge, there's no award, there's no pile of money. There's no look, you and I are not going to get inducted into the Intelligence Hall of Fame, right?
Right.
Like, you gotta be somebody else who never really did the job, like this administrator really pushed the envelope. Like, no, it doesn't work that way. And,
right.
And I want to get back into you in a second here, but just as an illustration point, as I was trying to get promoted to E5, I worked my ass off. I was motivated, and not to get promoted, but like, I'm going to do all these things, be ready to go and be squared away and study, work, be in great shape. And at the end, when my packet was rejected, because I'd gone to the headquarters, and I was under orders from my boss, Miss Smith. Shout out to Miss Smith. She was awesome. She's like, "Your job is not there. You don't do anything unless they call me first." And I'm like that. And that's very common. Just everybody understand. That's very common for a boss to say that. And so when First Sergeant Owen says, "Hey, I need you to help with change of command inventory," and I'm like, "Oh, sorry, you have to call Miss Smith. I'm not allowed to do that." That got me denied for promotion, right? And so the new policy on the team was Pete never goes to headquarters, and they gave me however long it was to shield me from any kind of exposure, anything negative. And we worked a lot less because we were starting to wind down. And that was when I got picked up, if you can believe that. So I stayed away from headquarters. All the great things I had done were basically unknown. And I took a bunch more naps, but that's when they're like, "Now you're NCO material." And it was just like it was ridiculous, man. How do you suspect people to be motivated if if you don't recognize the motivation, if you don't recognize the
Yeah.
performance, you know?
Yeah, it's a travesty. You know, there are a few people in my career militarily and in the Army that really um, affected me in an adverse way. I mean, you know, I was at 18 and a half years when I
Mm-hmm.
opted for medical retirement over sticking it out for another year and a half. And it had to do with a person who was in my chain of command that I had the opportunity to depart from that individual. And I didn't think twice about it. I thought I can stick around here for another year and a half. And at the time I was medically retired, you could not double dip. You couldn't get your
Mm-hmm.
retirement pay and your disability. So
Mm.
I just weighed out I did the math, and I'm like, if I retire today medically, that they're willing to do because my back is so jacked up, versus me staying another year and a half and drawing military retirement pay, I'm going to draw the same amount of money.
Yeah.
So I opted for the early out, but it didn't have to do, it had to do with as much of this person negatively impacting my personal life because
Yeah.
I was taking that person home every day. And there are a few people like that we meet in our lives.
Yeah.
And all I can say about them is that's their problem. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, they affected me negatively. I can come to terms with that. But you know, at the end of the day, that's between them and their maker. And I don't have a dog in their fight. Not
Yeah.
anymore. You know.
You got a few more minutes for me? I want to go a little longer if you don't
Absolutely,
mind.
man.
Okay, let's do it. Your career, to my knowledge, and I want you to correct me here, you spanned the dying embers of the Cold War all the way into the modern terror
Yeah.
time. That's
Yeah.
an incredible span and dramatic changes. So talk a little bit about like where it starts, where it begins, but how different is it over those 20 some odd years?
Yeah. You know, when I first came into CI, it was in '91, and I was in Germany at the time. So I had actually gone up to the Berlin Wall in um, it was in December of '89 when I went up there. So the oh no, I'm sorry, it was in August of '89, and then in
Mhm.
November the wall came down, right,
Yeah.
of '89. So I was up there 2 months prior, 3 months prior, literally spray painting on the Berlin Wall. Our tour bus driver took us out there, and with a can of spray paint, he pulled out a can of spray paint. He's like, "Who wants to ride on the wall?" You know, there's 40 people on the bus, and all of us wanted to ride on the wall.
Yeah.
So anyway, we all do that, and then you know, fast forward 2 years later, and I'm PCSing to Huachuca to go through the agent course, and of course, the Cold War is still solidly in my mind. I didn't
Right.
think I didn't think anything about China as a threat or North Korea as a threat because I didn't have the exposure to over either of those countries' geopolitical footprint, you know. Um, so, you know, it wasn't anything I thought about. What actually didn't even start really thinking about the Chinese until I was out of the Army and, you know, looking at working for NASA. And it just so happened we had an IO come in from China, and I had to, you know, snoop and poop on the guy and keep an eye on him. And anyway, that's when I really started researching and learning about the Chinese and their methodologies. Because going through the schoolhouse in 1991, everything, all the trade craft that we were exposed to or trained on was
Yeah.
all Cold War, the gentleman game of espionage, you know, and you know, honey traps and which are all viable, you know, tools that are still in use, but it wasn't like wasn't so much um, industrial espionage then, I guess, as it wasn't so much high-end R&D technology focus
Mhm.
as it was military defense related technology focus.
Right.
That was kind of the focus because we were in uniform, and that was our purview, you know, U.S. installations and soldiers and their access and placement. And so once I got out of the Army and I was at NASA and started looking at technologies that have defense relationships, then it was a huge transition. Then my eyes were like, holy moly, we're not protecting anything. I mean, that's kind of what I thought. I was just
Yeah.
like dumbfounded at how much information, you know, it wasn't just the Buran space shuttle that the Russians built that looked like ours. It's the Chinese vertical assembly building, and I mean the vehicle assembly building, and all these things that just have such. You can just see the relationship between their developed technologies and ours, and so
Yeah.
it's a leaking sieve, and it's this job is critical to protecting our country, and you hope that the people out there doing it are exercising their due diligence.
Yeah.
It's bigger than I ever could have imagined. Because of academia, because of places like DARPA, and
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and the national laboratories and things like that. That there's so many things that have defense related application that people that work with these technologies, they think are simple widgets that they're making, and
Mm-hmm.
the implications can be huge. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it's a really interesting time. We also opened the digital age, when we
Right.
deployed to Bosnia. I mean, in my short career, we went from writing reports in pencil in the classroom and taking can you type tests. Can you type? This whole next couple of hours is just on a typing test.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
sit there, if you can type, you're like type it out. You're like, I'm done. And they're like,
Well,
well, you can't be done already. I'm like, I can type. So,
or like in my case, I was worried about graduating the agent course because I could only jam out 27 words a minute.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
I was just over the hump.
Exactly. Yeah, that was it, right? And so when you leave early and you're like, I have nothing to do, I'm going to go stand in the courtyard and smoke and joke with my friends. They're like, well, you're not taking it serious. Like, how much more serious than passing do I need to be? Do I need to take the test again? I literally went back in. I'm like, I'll take the test again if you'd like. And they're like, yeah, because I guess they need people sit in the classroom. And so I went down and I did better. And I was like, there you go. Can I go outside now? Like, yeah, well, I guess so. They hated it, right? And then I'm taking pictures in a facility in Bosnia, and Dotch goes like, hey, can you get some pictures? So I'm like, hey, I'm going to take some pictures. And they're like, absolutely not. And so I take them anyhow, like with a digital camera, and a extractable hard drive and all these things that we had. It's just remarkable to the modern age where there's a whole entire cyber command now. What a difference,
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I mean, part of it, if I were to think about being in the environment today, man, you almost, if I imagine it, because I'm not exposed to it anymore. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't read a lot of CI related anything, intelligence related anything. I look at open source material. I look at a lot of it from a lot of different sources, conservative and liberal, to get
Mm-hmm.
kind of at the end of the day, draw my own conclusions,
Mm-hmm.
kind of a compilation data kind of approach. And, so I'm very in tune to what's going on in the world. And I
Mm.
can kind of glean threats from what I see through all this open source. But if I thought about myself being in an operational capacity, for anybody out there who's going to watch this or watching it, that might think, I'm interested in this career field. What I would say is I would almost venture to say it's probably so specialized today
Mm.
in the different avenues. And, of course, I mean, I guess it was even when we were in, because you got the TSCM guys doing,
I was going to ask, yes.
yeah, you got them doing that. And that's one aspect. You got guys doing human sources. So, I mean, yeah, the game is kind of the same, but
Yeah.
because of the technologies, there are certainly some changes. And one agent on the ground, probably he has to be, or she has to be augmented to deal with the various aspects of things that they're going to be facing.
Yeah.
Digital technologies and cloud cloud-based operations and so on. You know.
It's the job was always massive and spherical, and you had to pick a direction was picked for you, and then you had to go forward within your cone, right? And now it is I don't know, whatever is bigger than and more complex than spherical, like it's just this multiverse of things. When we start, we have ideas of what we are, and most commanders have no idea what a counterintelligence agent is. And you've had a successful career and you got to do some cool shit, because in our career we get to do cool shit. But if you could pick something other than the direction you were compelled to go, where would you have liked to have spent your time in terms of CI? Would it be TSCM? Would it be lie detector testing or whatever? Where would you like to have gone and been able to spend your career that you didn't get to do?
I think one of my strengths, and it may be my greatest strength, is digesting information and analyzing it.
Okay.
And I mean, I'm great at human behavior, and I'm great at identifying. I mean, in my own personal life, my family thinks I'm a mind reader because I finish. It's not just like I'm finishing sentences.
Yeah.
It's bizarre sometimes, and they're like, "Yeah, okay, you're the guy that reads everybody's mind." So I'm like, "Look, it was all context clues. It was the way you moved your body and what we're talking about, and I knew you were going to start talking about this." And it really, it kind of comes with the territory, you know.
It does.
And but when I think about if in a perfect world, I think I would have loved to have been at some place like DIA, doing an analysis on threat countries, because man, those guys and gals, they saturate in that, and those are some of our greatest assets, and very valuable people, and God bless them for what they do, and I pray none of them fall vulnerable to the threats that are out there looking to relate to them every day.
There are so many cool jobs in our field. That was the thing on Twitter today where the guy's like, is there anything as cool as an SR-71, out there in the military today? And I'm like, fuck yeah, counterintelligence agent. You might be doing, again, joint. So now you could be anywhere, or combined operations, and you're doing surveillance, counter surveillance, or counter surveillance. Like if that's your specialty and you get to do that all the time, well, what's fucking cooler than that? Sitting in Prague looking for the other team's counter surveillance, shit, that's awesome.
Yeah. I was just going to say, one of the greatest compliments that I got was when I talked to this fellow that was my teammate. He had gone back down to Bosnia. He was actually requested by name because of the work we did on this source. And I don't know how, I didn't ask him. I didn't want to know. He just told me I was requested to go back, and I did. And then I knew afterwards, that he went and did some special work. Yeah. May even still be there today. I suspect he is, because I can't find his footprint anywhere. So, those guys and gals that are out there doing that, they're the kind of guys that catch the Osama bin Ladens and the Soleimanis. They're the ones. It's the CI people on the ground, whether they work for the agency or they're military trained. I'm going to go with military trained, because I've worked with some agency folks and I didn't see the value. Sorry to say that, but that's
gotta be honest though.
But yeah, those guys and gals, man, they're the creme de la creme. They're the real creme de la creme. Those and the ones that are doing the agent handling in foreign countries. Yeah, those people. Now, those are the people that I think are just crucial. And if I were telling somebody today, a young soldier thinking about going in the military or considering counterintelligence, it would be probably the same thing that we were told. Try to go strategic as soon as you can, because I think that environment is where you get to see and touch so much real world information. And I think the route that you and I had, being in the combat environment or
Yeah.
tactical environment, it's harder to get information there. I think it's much harder.
It's much harder, and people don't realize just how hard it is. And everybody thinks they can do it, but day in, day out, the pace of ops, it's
Right.
smashing, because
Absolutely.
really, I've watched so many commanders that try to do like a tactical debrief or tactical questions, and I'm like, look, it's not my job to fix them. But I'm like, okay, so I have to steer clear of this guy wherever I go, because this dude isn't good at what he's doing, but we get this inflated ego, and all of us agents get inflated egos.
Yeah.
But when you can reliably go out and you can go, I don't need to know where the haystacks are, I know where the needles are. That's like the different level of thinking. And you don't get to that, Paul. You don't get to that for years until you've learned to get past your ego. You've learned to stop controlling conversations. You've learned to see things through the other people's eyes.
Yeah.
Then it starts to open up, and the needles start to shine in the sun. And you're like, "There's needles there. There's needles there."
Absolutely.
And that is not easily replicated. There's very few people that can do that kind of work. And I would say this to your credit and my credit too. We were rugged enough and good enough at the hard combat stuff, but smart enough to work in our world, that we ended up in the right spot. We ended up like, I can be muddy, I can drink shots, I can do all of that stuff and still operate. And a lot of our peers aren't built for that, and they don't want to do that. And I'll say this, and then I'll shut up and let you talk in response. It is harder to go, damn near impossible to go from strategic to tactical. Not better, just this direction has more resistance. And it's harder when you get there than it is from a tactical guy to slide over. And I'm not saying that and it's not easy going back towards strategic, but that tactical thing, it takes a very special person to be able to put on those 20-hour days, indefinitely. My federal organization that I worked with said, hey, you have to stop booking all of these hours. And I'm like, but I work for the 82nd. Like there's no limit to these guys work 30-hour days all the time. So I'll shut up about that, but talk about tactical, strategic, and the hardness that you need to have to be a combat collector.
Yeah. You said it. It is, I think I agree. It's more difficult to go from strat to tactical than the other way around. And going back to what you were asking earlier, about finding some worth or finding some satisfaction in having done the job, where in the absence of accolades, the fact that you have the perspective that you have, the fact that I have the perspective that I have, and that is that you were at the right place at the right time. You were where you were supposed to be. Call it however you like to call it.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, that's it. And no one else would have done or could have done what you did, because they didn't have your thought processes, and they didn't have your approach, and they didn't have your reporting style or capability. And, to be able to write a report and get it up the chain and get it to where it's succinct and digestible, that there's a value in that I don't think about often. I don't think about often, what a good job I did. I just don't. I'm not that type of person. I'm glad I got the accolades that I received. I'm glad I had a great team. I'm glad, all those things came together. Even though that is the case, there are times I wish I would have been strategic, right, and saw a different side of things, but it wasn't meant to be. And I've got to just kind of look at it for what it was and be glad about it, So I've had 13 surgeries since I've been off active duty. One of them is a paralyzed vocal cord. That's why I have some kind of a raspiness at times. I had a surgery on my neck in 2006 and paralyzed my vocal cord. And I was like unable to talk for 2 years. And all of a sudden, 2 years almost to the day, I had a sore throat, and all of a sudden I could talk. And, part of me, I don't know if you knew me on active duty, but I was always singing.
Yeah. You love to sing.
And so it was kind of this thing with me that, I loved to write songs, loved to sing. And it just, I thought that was a big part of who I was.
It was.
But when you lose a physical ability, I mean, I really could beat myself up and just dwell on it. But I don't think we can live our lives that way. Life's too
Yeah.
short. Um, and when you start talking to somebody like this, I think the name of your show is super.
Oh,
Break it
great.
down, because it really is. You're breaking down aspects of lives, and the people, where people have been and what they've gone through and what they've done, and what they're doing now. And I mean, you got some guests on here that I'm just like blown away by. People that are really kind of still producing high quality products in their life, whether it's about
Yeah.
themselves or writings, and it's inspirational to me. So I appreciate it, and don't stop doing it, because it's really something I like to watch and keep up with.
All right, man. I appreciate that. Thank you for doing that, and thanks for coming on the show. And it is the ability to grab a Paul or Greg, when I had Greg on the show, and collecting up these people from my own team and telling these stories, because nobody knows what Delta Company 165th did, but we were the dawn of the digital age, the dawn of the UAV age, because we had a Marine unit that flew robot airplanes around. This is in the 90s, and
Yeah.
all of these crazy things happened, and we did go out and we did find people who were doing bad things. And we did ensure that, hey, this peace agreement held, and people could say whatever they want to say about it, but we didn't know how to do any of that when we got there. We just got out and we did it, and we drank a lot and asked a lot of questions and wrote a lot of reports, and started all of that work that continues to this day in that region.
It absolutely does.
It's quite the legacy. All right, man. I'm not going to bug you anymore, but stand by. Let me wrap this thing up and I'll come back to you.
All right, brother.
Here we go. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly.